Everyone knows Kirk Hammett for being the wow master of Metallica. But in reality, he's much more than that, and the truth is that he's actually been a part of many other projects, including some rather strange ones. So today, let's take a look at all of them. Super quick guys, as always, please do not hesitate to comment on anything you hear or see in this video, and especially if you disagree with me, because the whole point of our Do You Want Heavy series is of course to start a conversation. But alright, let's do it. Kirk Hammett picked up the guitar at the age of 15 after getting hooked on his brother Rick's killer record collection, which included such bands as UFO, Led Zeppelin or Jimi Hendrix. So basically a classic starter kit for the 1970s rocker. And less than a year later, in 1979, he formed his very first band with some high school friends. Tim Agnell on guitar, Tom Hunton on drums and vocals, and Keith Stewart on vocals, which, as you might have already guessed, became the very first lineup of a band we will know later on as Exodus. Early on, those guys were yet another group of kids who were bashing out covers on hard rock and new wave of British heavy metal legends, mostly at backyard parties, covering Black Sabbath, Ozzy Osbourne, Judas Priest and Iron Maiden. But soon after that, they did start sneaking in their own material, and by 1981, things actually became quite serious. Agnell and Stewart left and were replaced by Hammett's friend and roadie Gary Holt on guitar and Paul Boloff on vocals. And that lineup simply clicked. Kirk and Paul bonded hard over punk and 1970s metal, and Exodus evolved into one of the raw pillars of what would soon explode as the Bay Area thrash scene. In 1982, Exodus dropped their first demo, simply titled 1982 Demo. Which, for the record, I still think is a genius title for the first demo. It featured only 3 songs and widely circulated in the underground tame trading circuit. And apparently all of the members of the big 4 of thrash metal, including Metallica, Anthrax and Slayer, did have those copies, thus actually cementing Exodus' role in forming the genre. And then in 1983, Exodus recorded another demo, Die by His Hand, with 2 more new tracks. And that's when things really started to kick off for the band. But that April, everything changed, as it was then when Metallica fired Dave Mustaine and tapped nobody else but Kirk Hammett to join them. And just like that, Kirk Hammett went from underground thrashers to what would eventually become the biggest metal band on the planet. But interestingly enough, Kirk Hammett's story with Exodus doesn't actually end there. Fast forward to 2012, the Paul Boloff Memorial Concert. Kirk reconnects with Gary Holt, and apparently the bond is still there. And sometime later, Kirk received an email from Gary, who asked him to play a solo on the upcoming Exodus album Blood In, Blood Out. And according to Kirk, he actually has been thinking about doing something with Exodus for a while back then. And so when he saw the email from Gary, he replied within 2 seconds. And as he put it, jamming with Gary again felt like time traveling back to those early, sweaty rehearsal rooms. Which, if you think about it, kind of reflected on the solo on Salt the Wound. As in my opinion, it actually did have that pure, old-school energy of the early Exodus. And it was actually a great way to honor the legacy of one of the most influential bands in thrash metal. If you think that after joining Metallica, Kirk Hammett ended his solo endeavors, you're absolutely wrong. As in reality, that's when everything had just begun. Back in the mid-80s, when Metallica were already becoming one of the biggest metal bands on the planet, Kirk Hammett, James Hetfield, and the late great Cliff Burton decided to do something, well, different. Something fun, stupid, and chaotic. And that something was Spastik Children, a punk project founded by Fred Cotton, James McDaniel, and Rich Jumbo Zealer that was less about music and more about complete mayhem. Now, Spastik Children wasn't a serious band by any means. These were drunk bar gigs with 0 rehearsals, 0 structure, and maximum ridiculousness. Kirk Hammett swapped his usual 6-string for 4 and played bass. James and Cliff rotated on random instruments, sometimes even switching roles mid-show, and the shows themselves were actually nothing like what Metallica fans are used to. at least today. They'd go on stage hammered, forget the lyrics, butcher the riffs, and laugh the whole time, making it somewhat of a therapy and a break from gigantic arenas which they took in small local pubs and bars in Northern California. And it looks like they loved every second of it. And the truth is that I would actually kill to attend one of those shows. On November 9th, 1990, RIP magazine threw a party for its 4th birthday, and the main feature announced for that party was a super band called The Gag. And that band actually consisted of Metallica's Kirk Hammett, Lars Ulrich, and James Hetfield, joined by Guns N' Roses' Axl Rose, Slash, and Duff McKagan, and Skid Row's frontman Sebastian Bach at top of it all. So not too shabby for a lineup.
Yes, that's true.
But this lineup full of stars did not have much material prepared. They just played some songs of all three bands and another classic Hair of a Dog, as well as Metallica's Whiplash, which they performed not once but twice, with James Hetfield and Sebastian Bach on vocals respectively. And actually that performance served as somewhat of a prelude for the massive Metallica Guns N' Roses 1992 tour, which, as we all know, was a full-blown disaster, and of which I briefly spoke on the show before, but I would actually love to cover it in full at some point in the future. So if you would like me to get to it sometime soon, please let me know in the comments, because I feel like there's quite a lot to talk about there.
James Hetfield looks like that torch that they carry up the stairs to light the Olympic fire.
But either way, according to the witnesses, that party was an absolute mayhem. And it's kind of ironic that next year, in 1991, the invitees for the RIP magazine party have changed quite drastically. And they actually featured Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam, and Soundgarden, instead of the wild guys who trashed the party a year before that. The next semi-serious cover band with Kirk Hammett in the lineup played their very first show on July 26 in 2019, and that is the one which many Metallica fans are actually aware of, and many have actually seen them live. The Wedding Band, which in addition to Kirk Hammett himself also features his Metallica bandmate Robert Trujillo, Ugly Kid Joe vocalist Whitfield Crane, and ex-Queens of the Stone Age drummer Joey Castillo, and which once again is a killer lineup by itself. Initially, it was a cover band which was actually created specifically to play at a wedding in Hawaii, hence the name of the band. Their next gig was apparently also in Hawaii, but at a surfing event, and the third show brought them to Canada, specifically the Cosmopolitan Music Hall in Richmond Hill, Ontario, where they performed a full 45-minute set of classic rock and metal covers, including AC/DC, Black Sabbath, Billy Idol, and many others. And the performance itself was tied in with an exhibition at the Royal Ontario Museum featuring pieces from Kirk's iconic horror and sci-fi collection, which basically eventually turned them into a full-on project beloved by many Metallica fans, and especially beloved at the after parties after Metallica's concerts. But then came something much more serious. On February 8th of 2022, Kirk Hammett officially announced his first ever solo record, the 4-track instrumental EP titled Portals, which was released on April 23rd. Back then, Kirk described it as audio cinematic, as it is supposed to be somewhat of a soundtrack to a movie playing in your head. And actually, I think that it is a perfect description of it. It is a moody, melodic fusion of progressive rock, classical, horror, and metal, crafted alongside Metallica's S&M 2 conductor Edwin Outwater and featuring contributions from Kirk's wife Lani. And that work actually did impress critics. Brave Words even said Portals was musically more interesting than Metallica's recent studio material, and especially if we specifically take a look at Kirk's solos on those albums. Metal Hammer called it a showcase of Kirk's true strength, cinematic vision, emotion, and technical ability, And I remember thinking to myself when I first heard it that this is actually one of the most interesting projects I've heard in a very long time. Although, as I recall, one song from it actually did sound quite a lot like the one I've heard from some other band. Which, by the way, if you haven't seen my episode about it from back in 2022, you should definitely watch it right after this video. But nevertheless, today, 3 years later, I actually think that Kirk did an incredible job on that one. And I'm really looking forward to a follow-up, which apparently he's supposed to release sometime soon. About it. But the truth is that our story about Kirk's side projects wouldn't have actually been complete without one more, in which he actually had a chance to collaborate with his hero, German guitar virtuoso Michael Schenker. Kirk Hammett himself remembers that when he first heard Schenker's solo on Mother Mary, it completely blew his mind. The phrasing, the tone, the precision, everything in that song simply appealed to Kirk. And especially the second solo, which Kirk even called the fastest descending lick he's ever heard in his life. And given the fact that Schenker himself also had never shied away from praising Metallica, calling them a fantastic band, it was only a matter of time when the two shredders would eventually collaborate on a song. And so, being a huge fan of Michael Schenker, Kirk always wanted to jam with his hero, and finally the dream became reality when the radio host Eddie Trunk arranged a Kirk and Michael jam. And right after that, Michael invited Kirk to play a solo on his all-star project Michael Schenker Fest, with the track Heart and Soul featuring Kirk's solo being an opener to the very first album Resurrection, released on March 2nd in 2018. And which, if you ask me, was actually one of the highlights of that record overall. And this, of course, was by far not the only guest appearance of Kirk's during his career. He also played lead guitar on the title track of the Kichigai EP by punk band Septic Death back in 1988, joined Pansy Division for a solo on the song Headbanger in 2006, had multiple live and improv collabs with Les Claypool, but most importantly, of course, played alongside the legendary Carlos Santana and Robert Randolph on the song Trinity, released in 2005. Yet the most surprising one of all of his collabs was, of course, his appearance on the rappers Knan's album Troubadour for a rock part on the song If Rap Gets Jealous. Yes, you heard that right. But yeah, that's about it. These are all or almost all side projects of Kirk Hammett's. At least the ones that, in my opinion, are actually worth mentioning. But what about you? Which one of those is your favorite one? And which ones did I forget? Because I specifically left out at least one in this video. Please let us know in the comments. As always, thank you so much for watching this video, guys, and we will prevail. Slava.